Leo, 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 yolo, Leo, 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 lo. Ri-di-o, di-di-o, di-di-di-di-di-di-di. Leo, Leo, Leo.
Hey guys, this is Verneer for CardRunners.com, and I'm bringing you the second in the Mount Micro 2011 series. This one's going to focus on note-taking, and I want to begin by giving a short update of my own progress in my $200 to $10,000 challenge, and then I'm going to give some brief introduction to note-taking, followed by some examples. So let's begin with a update on my challenge. I am pretty happy to report that I barely cracked the $1,000 mark with my $200 bankroll, and most of it came with a great run at the 25 no limit tables. I won about 25 binds or so, including rake back at 10 no limit, took a shot at 25 no limit, and just haven't looked back. Here's the graph. As you can see, the pace picks up considerably towards the end, and I will admit that I have run really well at 25 no limit, and I think with any kind of moving up progress, there's a good bit of luck involved in the early success of anybody. So I do think I'm playing well, but I'm not going to complain with the cards that I'm getting and the setups that I'm facing. Alright, so now let's go to the topic of the day, which is note-taking, and I will begin with a video that one of my students sent me. I asked my students to make videos for me. This is a hand that I took from one of these videos. It's a 25 no limit rush. So we have a limper in the cutoff. We isolate this limper with king jack offsuit, get called by a 11-6 regular from the small blind, and face a donk bet on a 3-6 ace board with an overcall. So we have no equity and we end up folding, but we do sit out so that we can observe the hand. On the turn, the small blind leads again so he led for half pot on the flop, and now he's leading for a quarter pot on the turn, and the initial limper calls pretty quickly, and on the river the small blind leads for between a fifth and a fourth pot, and the limper calls pretty quickly. Small blind shows up with ace king, and the initial limper shows up with pocket kings. So my student makes two notes. Limp called a raise with king king, check called all streets on the cutoff, and then on the regular, called ace king in the small blind, bet small all streets, ace 6 3, let me go back, XX board. So that's the note he took. Actually, that's the two notes he took, and in this video we're going to discuss basically where we would go from here. So everything we cover in note-taking is going to relate to one of these ideas. First of all, your notes should supplement your HUD, not mirror it. Now, all these ideas I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in a bit. Secondly, you want to focus on irregulars and people you will see again, not so much on the fish. Third, the more detail you put down, the better. Third, anything that you see non-standard is going to be a good note. So for example, if somebody calls Jack 3 suited to a 3-bet in position, and they seem from their HUD to not be a complete fish, I would make a note on that. And finally, anything exploitable, anything that you think you are going to be able to, anything that if you knew that this is how they played the hand, you definitely could have played the hand for much more value. Make a note of that as well. It's important that your notes don't mirror your HUD. For example, if you write something like folds to a lot of 3-bets, but the HUD says that this person has a fold to 3-bet of like 88%, then the note just takes up space in your note box. Calls very loosely out of the blinds is another thing that is not really relevant. It's not very helpful. Opens 9-10 suited from early position. Again, that's something that you can click on the yellow box, which gives you all this HUD data, and you can notice that somebody opens, let's say 20% of hands from early position, and you can surmise that 9-10 suited might be in that range. Some of the funnier notes that are pretty useless. I've seen players make, bad player tilts me hard, and it's not going to be effective. As soon as your HUD pops up, you'll pretty quickly realize that this player is a bad player. So the second thing to focus on is to focus on regulars. Take notes on people that you have a lot of hands on. These are the players that you're going to be faced. You're going to face them quite a bit, and you will find yourself in marginal situations against them. It would also allow you to get paid progressively more when you have the best hand, and lose progressively less when you have the worst hand. Now, as far as fish are concerned, usually you're not going to see fish session after session after session. If you do, then they're going to be a fish irregular, and you definitely want to take notes of them. But usually you can get away with just making mental notes on fish, unless your short-term memory is absolutely horrible. So in general, fishes are going to be fish, and you can, they're not going to be around for much longer. Next, the more detail you're able to put down, the better off and more helpful the note is going to be in the future. So, for example, if you wrote down called 3-bet with 6-7 suited, this doesn't tell you a lot. For example, if they open on the button with 6-7 suited and faced a min 3-bet and a call from the blinds, and they were very deep, this would be a very standard call, and I would make it 100%, and it doesn't tell you anything about the player. On the other hand, if they opened from middle possession and they got 3-bet by a regular who's on the button and is going to have position on him post flop, and they ended up calling a pretty significant 3-bet to see a flop with 6-7 suited, combine that with the fact that they fold to a lot of 3-bets in general, 60% of 3-bets, then this is something that I would note. And I would note it in this fashion, as you can see on the bottom. Called 3-bet with 6, and I note the suits there, just because depending on how the board runs out, that can become important. From middle position versus button, check called Queen 7, 5 rainbow flop, Jack of spade went check check, and then he checked the 2 diamond on the river. So this tells me that he's going to check call marginal made hands out of position, and on the river he's just going to be looking to get to showdown. So he's not going to turn his hand into a bluff. Like, he's not going to, if he has a pair of 7s there, he's not going to look to, he's just going to look to try to show that down against ace king, and is not going to try to, bluff me off kings or bluff me off top pair or anything like that. So let's go back to the initial example we have where we saw the ace king offsuit go to showdown against pocket kings. So first of all, I would not make a note on Yuham89, the player who limp called and kings preflop in this position. It's not a player that I expect to see around much longer, and yeah, I mean, basically I'm not going to have a lot of hands on this person, and this note is going to be, it's not going to be very relevant. On the other hand, the other player from the small blind, I definitely expect to see him again, and this is a hand that I thought he played in a non-standard way. So I would the note I would take is cold ace king offsuit in small blind to cut off limp and button ISO. This is important because if I raised from early position and somebody just called in the small blind with ace king, I don't think there would be anything substandard about that. I think somebody could 3-bet there, and I think they can cold call there. I think both are fine. On the other hand, if a fish limps and a regular isolates on the button, to flat with ace king from the small blind it's unusual. Now the next part of the note is donk bet, 3 of clubs, 6 of hearts, ace of spade board for 1/2 pot size bet, 1/4 pot size bet versus fish on 2 of clubs turn, and 1/5 pot size bet on 10 of clubs river. So everything I wrote there is strictly factual, which is very, very important. You just want to write down facts, and it's fairly detailed. So now let's look at how we would use this. First of all, when I read this later on, one of the things that strikes me is that villain is going to take, it's a passive line both pre-flop and post-flop. So this makes me think that the villain likes to get to showdown cheaply while sacrificing potential value. Taking that a step further, this is not somebody that I want to be bluffing or slow playing against. And if this person starts actually getting aggressive and I don't have the nuts, I really need to consider folding. When I say the nuts, I mean the effective nuts. Like if I have, second set on a dry board, I'm not always going to put him on a top set, but I'm going to put him on a hand that he thinks is going to be the effective nuts. So make notes that you can then extrapolate information and from and be able to exploit this villain and play against them much more effectively. Here's a hand that I played recently at the 10 no limit level where I got check raised on a 9-2-5 spade board by a player who had Jack Queen offsuit. So the note I took is big blind versus middle position raised, check raised 9-2-5 with 2 spades flop with essentially air, and checked a king of spade turn. This would have been a good card for him to bluff and represent a flush, but then bet 1/2 pot size bet on 8 of heart river. So when I look at this, I can see that this player will play the flop much more than play his own hand. So this is a pretty good flop to check raise because it's draw heavy, etc. But he does it with a hand that has absolutely no equity other than 2 potential overcards. So he's essentially doing it with air. He doesn't have any backdoor spades or anything like that. He didn't bluff the obvious scare card, being the spade, and then he took a cheap shot on the river. Very small bet, which only has to work a third of the time to show a profit. So that's the first example. The second example, you actually don't see what they had, but the player who bet initially is he had pocket kings in this case. So we went to the flop multi-way, and he bet half pot 3-way with pocket kings on a 9-10 ace flop. Very draw heavy, ace high flop. He bet small, and then he blocker bet very small on the turn, and he check called the river. So again, this is an example of somebody who likes to get to showdown cheaply and just does not like folding any kind of made hand. So, well, you guys tell me how you would use this note against this player. In part 2 of the series, we're going to go to Hold'em Manager and look at how we can use the player filter to look for regulars that we have a lot of hands against and start really painting a picture of their game and looking for ways to exploit that. So until next time, for CardRunners.com, this has been Verneer.